So welcome again. My name is Paul Smyers. I'm a practicing real estate agent in southwestern Virginia. And today I'm going to talk a bit about buying property on some kind of a water feature land, like if you want to be on a river or perhaps a lake or a stream. It's a very desirable thing to have a piece of land that has some water features on it. People like to fish and have a boat or go out just canoeing or something, or maybe a stream. A stream provides perhaps some fish if it's big enough, and so on. But there's a few things that you really need to consider when you buy land near a stream or any kind of water feature. For one thing, um, the streams of Virginia, and like many places, they wander around. If you have a heavy rain and runoff, it can be extremely different channel that the water in a stream will definitely vary. After a while, it'll carve its own path down the hill. So definitely you want to have here any kind of a structure quite a bit of distance from any kind of stream, because it'll erode the ground on which it's built. You see, so that's another thing to keep in mind. If the stream is near a place and the only building lot is like 10 feet away from a stream, it's going to be a problem. So that's one thing to keep in mind, how close you are as far as the structure of the building. And the same thing applies to any kind of a river. On the lake, for example, the lake's level does not change that much, especially if it's a lake that has a dam, like Smith Mountain Lake. They don't let it change much in level. So that isn't a problem really at flooding, but at the same time, there's another issue that really comes into play when you have a country home, and that is your septic system. Most of the counties and states, there's rules. You don't want to have stuff from septic systems all around the lake to come into the lake. You see, so there's laws and rules of careful planning with getting any kind of septic system. Has to be a distance from any kind of water feature. Often it's about 100 feet. So if you are near a lake, you're not going to be putting your house 10 feet from the lake, most likely, because a lot of times the edge of a lake will slope down. So if you want to have a septic system, it's going to be 100 feet away from the lake edge, and the slope is down. You're going to have to put the septic higher than the house, and that requires a special pumping system and some problems. So you can really get into some issues. And another thing is, if you have a house right on the edge of a water and there's a public lake and or a public river and lots of people go by, you're going to have a lot less privacy. So again, the septic system is a very important thing to consider, how far away that you have to build any kind of structure from any water feature to have a safe location. Now again, same with the river and streams. The legal definition typically is the middle of a river is where the boundary is. And over a period of time, if you have a very, very small stream, it's not going to vary that much. But if you have something, say, 20 or 30 feet wide, and then there's flooding and high rainfall times, that is going to shift considerably, and sometimes it'll make a property even completely useless to build on, because if you have a lot of erosion. So that's another thing to think about. One of the things that you have, for example, I see river properties where I'm at Smith Mountain Lake. There's a big river that comes into that lake and feeds it, and you can get waterfront properties, but they're not really on the lake. They're way up the river, maybe a few miles, and it's technically part of the lake, and you can have access to the lake, but it's not the same as having a huge access. Now that brings up another subject, is how much of a waterfront that you actually have. Typically a lake has no matter how big it might be, there's a limit to how much frontage the land is on the river or the lake. So most zoning, there's usually a minimum of some kind of access, like 50 feet for the river. I mean, if you have access to a lake and it's 10 feet wide or 5 feet wide, it's usable technically, but it's not very practical. So most divisions and subdivisions around a lake, the town people know that this is a very valuable situation here, and they want to have as many access and many properties as possible to have access to the lake. But if everyone gets 300 or 400 feet of access, then it limits how many people can actually have a waterfront property. Now, you're going to pay a lot more for a piece of property that's on a lake, especially if it's a very popular lake and has a lot of room for different kinds of boats and so on. So it's in demand. Even way out in the boonies, if you try to buy a piece of property that's on a lake and it really has complete access and full deeded access, then you're going to be paying more for that piece of land. Now, another thing that comes up is docks. In some areas of the country, like in Smith Mountain Lake, there are grandfathered in some really huge docks. And if you want to build like a really large dock, you know what I'm talking about, maybe they're 50 feet by 50 feet and there's place for 4 boats and all that, it takes up a lot. Some of these people build really kind of eyesore things on the lake, and sometimes the zoning comes in and says, well, you know, there's certain safety standards, and if some pillar is put into the water, then eventually it might rot, so there's inspection things you have to deal with when you have like a floating dock or something. So those kind of issues can sometimes get kind of expensive, but certainly they're something you have to think about when you buy a piece of land on a lake. So another thing is the trees and so on that might be on the property that may have to be removed, or you get wind on certain areas of the lake. I mean, sometimes if you're right on the lake and the wind blowing a certain way, it's just, there's no obstruction. Just, so you might have to think about that. There are some areas that, you know, there's so many properties and everybody trying to get there. You might get a trespasser now and then, or somebody comes by too close in a boat, and maybe you feel uncomfortable with the privacy thing. So living on a lake, you're exposed to the entire lake, and whoever's happened to be on a boat, they can be 10 feet away from your yard and go fishing there. So as long as they're not bothering anybody, it's not really illegal or anything. But then again, like I said, there's sometimes can get into privacy issues. Like, for example, the Shenandoah River in Virginia. Getting a place on the river, you know, they're all pretty much taken. I mean, if they ever come up for sale, people certainly buy them. But there are a lot of people on a river like that go by canoeing and kayaking. So all summer long, you could have like hundreds of people just floating by your property if you're on the river. So those are a few things to consider. We covered a little bit about the septic and the well issue, for example. Typically, you know, some areas do have the city water provided to developments that are now built near the lake, but the septic setback is a standard thing to keep the water clean and so on. So how much frontage you have makes a difference, and sometimes, you know, if you got 100 feet, the price is going to be higher than if you have 40 or 50 feet. There's typically some minimums now with towns that, like, they don't want to have like a 3-foot access to a lake. I mean, you know, it's not very practical. So some towns allow you to have temporary residence. In other words, you can rent out like an Airbnb. In my area, there's one part of the lake in another county that they don't permit the part-time rentals, or, you know, in another part of the lake they actually do. So some people will buy a pretty expensive house right on the lake, and then they'll rent it out for $2,000 a week. They have a $3,000 mortgage or something, so it's pretty good. So those are kind of things to think about when you're going to buy land if you're going to live on a lake. High demand, and there's a price to be paid for trying to get yourself right on a lake. Now, one of the things that happens, like in my area, you can get a piece of property that has some deeded access that is built into, maybe you got subdivided, and maybe, for example, a property that once upon a time, it was one piece of property and it was on the lake, and then a road in the middle, and then on the other side there was another piece of property that was actually owned by the same people. Time passed after a while, and they decide, well, I'm going to sell that piece that's really not on the lake, but they might include in the deed, say, yeah, okay, you can use our frontage as a part of an easement or a deeded access or something like that. So that happens. Some of the big lakes, like the one I'm on, are near, has state parks, and there's public access, and there's different kinds of marinas that people can store a boat at. So even if your property isn't right on the water and you're paying less for it, but it's near then you can easily go and get access by going onto a public marina where you tie up your boat or something, or go to the state park if you want to swim and so on. So again, a little bit of coverage about buying and selling property on the lake. If you do have property on the lake anywhere in Virginia and you'd like to sell, please call me, because I can help you sell for sure, no doubt about it. But anyway, thanks again for listening. I appreciate all the feedback. Please like and share, and you can see my email address and phone number in the content here on the text. So thanks again for listening.